Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. As always, it's good to be back with yet another true crime case to talk about. And if you are new here, hello and welcome. Why don't you stick around to see what kind of shocking true crime case I have for you today. And also please do subscribe to the channel for more cases just like this one. Alright guys, let's get into it. But before I do, if you hear any background noise like music, I'm sorry about that. The neighbors are playing music and I wasn't about to let them stop me from recording this case for you guys because already I'm late. I'm behind schedule. I know I was supposed to have uploaded this video like a long time ago, but a lot of things got in the way, so I'm not about to let them stop me from recording this one for you guys. But if you do hear some background music, please do forgive me. It's the neighbors playing their own music. But also today we're going to be talking about a very disturbed individual by the name of Albert Fish from the 1800s. Some of you may already know about him, but some of you may not. So for those of you who haven't heard about Albert Fish, get ready. It's going to be a very bumpy ride. So without any further ado, sit back, relax, and let me tell you all about the messed up case of Albert Fish. Albert Fish was born on May 19th in 1870 in Washington, D.C., and his parents were Randall and Ellen Fish. Albert's father was an American man and his mother was a Scots-Irish-American woman. Albert was the youngest of 4 siblings, and his siblings were Walter, Annie, and Edwin. Albert's family had a history of mental illnesses. His uncle was diagnosed with mania, and one of his brothers was put in a mental hospital, and also his sister Annie was diagnosed with a mental affliction, and also 3 of his relatives were also diagnosed with mental illnesses, and also his mother had oral and or visual hallucinations. In 1875, Albert's father, Randall, who was working as a fertilizer manufacturer, suddenly got a heart attack and died at the Baltimore and Parma Railroad station. And after this, Albert's mother took him to an orphanage known as the St. John's Orphanage. And his stay at this orphanage was not really what you would call pleasant. As a matter of fact, Albert suffered a lot of physical abuse while he stayed at this orphanage. But it is said that as time went on, for some reason, Albert started enjoying the pain that he got from the physical abuse at this orphanage. And then 5 years later, Albert's mother got a job, a government job, and then she was able to take him out of the orphanage. And then in 1882, when Albert was 12 years old, he got into a relationship with a telegraph boy. And it is said that this telegraph boy introduced Albert to a lot of things such as urolagnia, which is drinking urine, and also coprophagia, which is eating feces. And then Albert started going to public bathhouses where he would stalk other boys while they undressed, and he would spend the majority of his weekends doing this. So this obviously was not a good sign as he was growing up. And then by 1880, when Albert was 20 years old, he moved to New York City. And when he got to New York City, he started getting involved in male prostitution. But that wasn't the end of it. Albert also started molesting and also sexually assaulting young boys who were even younger than the age of 6. In 1898, Albert got into an arranged marriage with a woman named Anna Hoffman, and they ended up having 6 kids together. But even though Albert was now a family man, he still wasn't willing to get out of trouble, because in 1903 he was arrested for grand larceny. He was then convicted and incarcerated at the Sing Sing Correctional Facility. Albert also talked about a time when a male lover of his took him to a wax museum, and when they got to this museum, Albert came across a bisection of a penis, and he said he was quite fascinated by it, and this ended up starting his obsession with sexual mutilation. And then a couple of years later, in 1910, Albert was working in Wilmington, Delaware, and this is when he came across a 19-year-old young man by the name of Thomas Keaton. Albert took Thomas to his home and they got into a sadomasochistic relationship. It couldn't really be confirmed if Albert forced Thomas to get into the kind of things they did together, but according to his confessions, it is implied that Thomas was an intellectually disabled young man. And then after 10 days of being together, Albert took Thomas to an old farmhouse where he held him captive for 2 weeks, torturing him, and then eventually he tied him up and then cut off half of his penis. And then Albert said that he actually intended to kill Thomas and then cut up his body into different pieces, and then he wanted to take those pieces home with him. But then he said because of the hot weather at that time, he couldn't really do it because he knew that it would bring a lot of attention to him once those body pieces started to decompose. So instead, what he did was he cut off half of his penis, and then after that he poured peroxide into the wound, and he covered it with a Vaseline-covered handkerchief. And then after that he kissed Thomas goodbye and then left a $10 bill for him. And then he said he never looked back, and according to him, he never even wondered what became of Thomas. So it's safe to say that he never gave a damn about him. I mean, obviously he never gave a damn because he cut off half of his penis, but he said he never put a second thought to Thomas ever again. And then in January of 1917, Albert's wife Anna left him for a man named John Straub. And John was a handyman who was boarding with the Fish family. So because of this, Albert was now left as a single parent to raise all their 6 kids by himself. And then at some point, Albert started having hallucinations of his own. At one time, he wrapped himself up in a carpet, and he kept on saying that he was taking instructions from John the Apostle because he was telling him to do this. So it seemed like Albert's family's history of mental illnesses also got to him as well. It is said that this is also the time when Albert started getting into self-harm by embedding needles into his groin and into his abdomen. After he got arrested, it was revealed that over 29 needles were found embedded in his groin. And he would also repeatedly hit himself with a nail-studded paddle. And also one time he took some wool that was doused with lighter fluid and he put it inside his anus and he lit it on fire. So obviously something was not okay with Albert at this point. Around 1919, Albert started kicking things into high gear. He stabbed an intellectually disabled boy who lived in Georgetown. And it seemed like he mostly chose people who were intellectually disabled or African American. And when he explained himself, when he explained his choice of victims, he said that he took these people because he thought that no one would notice or miss them if they were killed. He also claimed that he would also pay other boys to bring him more children for him to victimize. Albert tortured and murdered young kids using a meat cleaver, a butcher knife, and a handsaw. Around July 11th in 1924, Albert came across an 8-year-old girl by the name of Beatrice Keel, who was playing on her parents' farm. They lived on Staten Island in New York. He offered her money to come help him look for something called a rhubarb, and she almost left with him before her mom came out and managed to chase Albert away. And then 3 days later, Albert found and killed another child by the name of Frances McDonald, who was only 8 years old at this time. During this time, apparently Albert was suffering from a psychosis, and he believed that God was giving him instructions to find, torture, kill, and also sexually mutilate young kids. On May 26th in 1928, Albert saw a classified ad in the Sunday edition of the New York World. And it was about a young boy who was 18 years old named Edward Budd. And it said that Edward was looking for a job. And also on this classified ad was the address of where Edward lived. So Albert decided to visit the Budd family, and then he introduced himself as Frank Howard. And he said he was coming to hire Edward to come work for him on his farm in Farmingdale. He also said that he would hire both Edward and his friend Willie, but then he ended up not coming back for them when he said he would, and then he ended up sending a letter apologizing for not showing up. And then he set another date of when he would come to actually get the boys. Albert confessed that he wanted to take Edward so he could tie him up and then mutilate him and then leave him to bleed to death all by himself. But then when Albert came back to the Budd family to take Edward with him, he then came across Edward's younger sister named Grace. Grace was just 10 years old at this time, but it seemed like Albert was now fascinated by her, and so he started focusing on her and he forgot all about Edward. So Albert came with this plan, this lie, that he was actually on the way to attend a birthday party of his niece. So he started begging the Budd family to let him take their daughter Grace with him to this party. And once they agreed, he took the 10-year-old girl to an old abandoned house known as the Wisteria Cottage on 459 Mountain Road. And this is where this madman murdered this little girl, and after that he started eating her body. On November of 1934, an anonymous letter was sent to Grace's family, and this letter eventually led the police to Albert. The letter talked about a lot of other things, but near to the end, it started talking about how Grace was killed. The details of the murder were investigated by the police, and they matched a lot of what was said in that letter. but it couldn't be positively confirmed if it was true that he actually ate parts of her body. The letter was sent in an envelope that had a small hexagonal emblem with the letters NYPCBA, and these letters represented the New York Private Chauffeurs Benevolent Association. And this ended up leading the chief investigator of this case to Albert's rented room after he got some information from the janitor who worked at the association. The investigator waited outside until Albert came back, and when he did, they talked for a little bit, and then Albert was taken to the police station for questioning. When he was questioned about the murder of Grace, he actually didn't deny it. He didn't put any effort into denying this accusation. As a matter of fact, he also confessed that at first he intended to kill Edward, but then Grace got a bit more of his attention, and then that's when he started to be fascinated by her instead. But then he also said that he had no intention of sexually assaulting Grace. He said that part never came to his mind. But then, while he was talking to his attorney, it was mentioned that while he was on top of Grace, strangling her, he involuntarily ejaculated 2 times. And when this was used in the trial, it made it seem like the murder of Grace was more sexually motivated, and so people didn't pay much attention to the fact that he cannibalized her. Albert had 2 other known victims, and one of them I've already talked about, the young boy named Francis McDonald. And Albert killed this boy on July of 1924. On July 14th in 1924, Francis was playing with his friends. They were playing catch, and when they were done playing, Francis never came back home. And so when he didn't come back home, that's when a search party was put out for him, and then just moments later they found his body. His body was found hanging by a tree in a wooded area near his home. And Francis had actually been sexually assaulted and then strangled with his own suspenders. And according to the autopsy, he had suffered extensive lacerations to his legs and his abdomen, and also his left hamstring had been completely ripped off his flesh. At first, Albert didn't want to take any responsibility for the murder of Francis, but then later on he started talking about how at first he wanted to castrate the boy. So now it was very obvious that he was the one responsible for the murder. This young boy's friends said they saw him with a man who had a gray mustache, and even the neighbor of where Francis lived and his mother as well said they saw a man with a similar description in the area. And this is when Albert got the nickname the Gray Man. The murder of Francis remained unsolved until the murder of Grace Budd. At first, Albert denied the charges, but then in 1935, after the conclusion of the trial for Grace, he finally confessed to killing Francis, and he also confessed to sexually assaulting him as well. Another confession that Albert made was that of the murder of a 4-year-old boy named Billy Gaffney, who is the second confirmed victim that I'm going to talk about next. On February 11th in 1927, Billy Gaffney was playing with 2 boys in his apartment. One boy was named Billy Beaton, who was 3 years old, and Billy's older brother, who was 12 years old at the time. And these 3 boys were playing in their apartment hallway in Brooklyn. When the 12-year-old boy left the other 2 boys by themselves, that's when they disappeared. Billy Beaton was found on the roof of his apartment building, and when he was asked where Billy Gaffney was, he said that the boogeyman took him. And unfortunately, Billy's body was never found. Joseph Meehan, who worked as a motorman on a Brooklyn trolley, saw a picture of Albert in the newspaper, and immediately he recognized him as the man who was with a young boy in a trolley. And this was on the day when Billy Gaffney went missing. He remembered that this old man was trying to quiet down this boy, as the boy kept on crying for his mom. So the police knew that he had to be involved in this. And they also discovered that on the day when Billy went missing, Albert was hired as a painter by a Brooklyn real estate company, and where he worked was just a few miles away from where Billy was abducted. And just the same with Grace Budd, Albert wrote a lengthy letter to Billy's family telling them exactly what he did to him. Billy's mom, Elizabeth, went to the Sing Sing Correctional Facility to try to talk to Albert and find out exactly what happened to her boy, but unfortunately when she got there, Albert was not talking at all. As a matter of fact, at some point he started crying, saying that he wanted to be left alone. Elizabeth ended up not believing that Albert is the one who killed her boy. The trial for Grace started on March 11th in 1934, and it lasted for 10 days. And of course, Albert took the insanity plea, saying that he was hearing God's voice in his head telling him to kill kids. And several psychiatrists testified about many of his sexual fetishes, and it is quite a long list. So I'm going to put it up on the screen for you to read it if you want, and you could pause and read. His defense counsel noted that Albert was a psychiatric phenomenon, and that there is nowhere in legal and medical records where an individual displayed so many sexual abnormalities. And again, when it comes to his victims, there were other murders that Albert was suspected of as well. And these are the murders of 5-year-old Emma Richardson from 1926, 6-year-old Robin Jane from 1931, 16-year-old Mary Ellen O'Connor from 1932, and 17-year-old Benjamin Collins from 1932. Members of the jury did not doubt the fact that this man was insane, but later on, one of the members said that even though they knew he was insane, they still wanted this man to be executed for his actions. So at the end of it all, they found him guilty of all his charges, and they also found him sane, and they wanted him to be executed. And then the judge sentenced him to death by electrocution. Albert was taken to prison in March of 1935, and then finally on January 17th in 1936, he was executed by electrocution at the Sing Sing Correctional Facility. He got into the chamber at 11:06 p.m. and then just 3 minutes later he was pronounced dead. He was buried at the prison cemetery, and it was said that his last words were, "I don't even know why I'm here." At a meeting with the reporters, Albert's lawyer, James Dempsey, revealed that he was in possession of his client's final statements. These statements were several pages of handwritten notes that Albert had wrote down just hours before his death. And when James was asked to talk about what these statements said, he refused and said, "I will never show it to anyone." It was the filthiest string of obscenities I had ever read. So you can just imagine to yourself how messed up whatever he said in those statements was, if his own lawyer couldn't even talk about them. So what do you guys think about this one? Geez, man, I got no words. I have no idea what to say about this. I actually cannot believe that someone like this actually once existed at some point in time. When I read up about him, when I was doing my research, it felt like I was reading up about something that was in a fictional book or a movie or something. It felt unreal. So I'm seriously curious to know what you guys have to say about it. But yeah, guys, that was the messed up case of Albert Fish, also known as the Gray Man. And I think I speak for all of us when I say that the world definitely did not suffer a loss when this man was executed, that's for sure, because he was something on his own. He was just terribly messed up. And rest in peace to all of his victims, and I hope that the families at that time felt relieved when they got justice for their loved ones. And it's just cases like these, when they involve children, they get a bit hard to talk about. For me personally, they get a bit difficult for me to talk about them, but I find some solace in the fact that justice was served for the victims and for their families, and that this person did not just get away scot-free, and they didn't just get to live their lives fully without any consequences, but they are difficult to talk about when they involve children. But that is all that I have for you guys on this case. Please do let me know what you think about it in the comments. And also, please, if you enjoyed watching, do me a big favor and leave the video a thumbs up so it can help me out with the algorithm. I really want to grow my channel. I want to get it out there. I want it to reach as many people as we possibly can so we can grow this community of ours. And also, thank you guys for hanging out with me today. As always, it means absolutely everything to me. It means a lot to me that you guys take time out of your days to hang out with me and to just listen to my content and to watch my content. And also, again, if you are new here, please subscribe to the channel for more true crime content just like this one. And with that being said, I will see you guys in the next video. I doubt that this coming week, I'm going to be available. I have a commitment that I have to attend to. I doubt that I'm going to be available, but I will be back again with another true crime video. And so with that being said, please do take care of yourselves. Enjoy the rest of your day. Stay safe, and I will see you guys again next time. Cheers.